A poor 12-year-old boy working at a fancy garden restaurant overhears something he was never meant to hear, a secret that could cost a powerful man his life. Moments later, a single act of courage turns the night upside down and sets off a chain of events that no one could have imagined. And it will change both of their lives forever. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories every day. The sun was sinking low behind the oak trees, brushing the wide Texas sky with shades of honey, rust and fading gold. Crickets had begun their song, and the cicadas hummed from the tall grass beyond the fence. In the distance, the Magnolia Garden restaurant shimmered like a dream, a grand open-air estate with whitewashed fences, ivy climbing the porch rails, and lanterns glowing softly among the magnolia blossoms. The air smelled of lemon oil and rosemary, of money and calm, the kind of place for people who never needed to count the price of bread. At the back gate stood Jalen Carter, 12 years old, skinny as a fence post, clutching a small brown paper bag as if it held his whole world. His shoes were split at the toes, the laces frayed and knotted unevenly. His shirt, too big for his shoulders, had been mended in half a dozen places with thread that didn't quite match, but it was spotless, always spotless. His mama used to say, "We might be poor, baby, but dirt don't live on dignity." So every morning, before he left the tiny apartment behind the laundromat, he'd scrub his nails, straighten his collar, and make sure he looked like somebody trying. And that is also the minimum condition for you to be allowed to be here. He pushed the wooden gate open. It groaned like it hadn't been oiled in years. From the kitchen porch came the smell of roasted garlic, melted butter, and fresh-baked bread, the kind of scent that could make a hungry boy dizzy. Strings of light hung between the trees, flickering like fireflies above the guests' tables outside. Waiters in crisp white shirts glided through the garden carrying silver trays, their reflections dancing in the glass pitchers of water and wine. Jalen slipped inside the back area, the rough dirt path cool beneath his worn soles. He worked fast, gathering rags, collecting empty plates, sweeping the terrace steps, all with the quiet grace of someone who had learned to exist without being seen. For 6 months now, he had been coming after school, trading work for a warm plate and a few folded bills. Even in Jalen. It was Mr. Brooks, the manager, tall, kind-eyed, the sort of man who noticed things others missed. He smiled, that careful smile that meant "I see you, but stay smart. You've got good hands, kid, and a better heart. Keep 'em both clean, you hear?" Jalen nodded, that shy, almost bashful nod that belonged to children who knew not to speak unless spoken to. Then without a word, he hurried off, balancing a stack of plates almost as tall as his chest, his thin arms trembling but determined. Every now and then, his gaze drifted toward the front garden where the rich folks sat laughing under the magnolias, their silverware clinking softly. He didn't envy them, not really. He just wondered what it must feel like to live without worry, to eat without counting coins. Then with a small grin, the innocent kind only a boy could have, he whispered to himself, maybe one day. Outside, the warm wind carried the hum of the city, cars, laughter, music from far-off streets. Inside the glowing garden, with lanterns swaying and fireflies blinking above the grass, Jalen Carter, the boy who owned nothing, looked for a fleeting moment, like he belonged. He didn't know it yet, but tonight, beneath the golden light of the Magnolia Garden, his quiet world was about to turn forever. Dinner hour wrapped the room in a velvet hum, crystal chimed, low laughter braided with jazz. Jalen moved like a shadow, mop in hand, keeping to the edges as he always did. He'd been doing the back rooms tonight when he ducked into the wine cellar to grab a cloth. The cool stone and stacked crates felt safer than the dining room. He didn't expect anyone to come down there. He certainly didn't expect them to close the door with such careful hands. Behind the wooden wine room door, voices leaned close, conspiratorial and soft. They shut the door as if sealing a secret, and they had no idea a boy was already sitting among the corks and dust. "You'll pour this one for him," a woman's voice murmured, smooth, practiced, the kind that smiled while cutting. "And if he notices?" The man whispered back, low, familiar, trembling not from fear, but from excitement. "He won't," she said. He never looks too closely, especially when I'm the one handing him the glass. Jalen froze. Through the narrow crack, he saw Mrs. Davenport, elegant as always, her pearls glowing faintly under the chandelier. She stood close, too close, to the waiter, a younger man with a sharp jaw and restless hands. His name tag read Elliot. Mrs. Davenport palmed something small from the depths of her purse, a tiny glass vial, the kind that fit into a palm and could be hidden by a glove. It caught the light and looked like nothing more than a sliver of moon. She held it between thumb and forefinger, as if fondling a secret. "You still trust me, right?" she whispered. "I trust you," he said, his voice rough. "But this chess," her smile tightened. "You wanted a way out, I'm giving us both one." Their eyes met, a mix of fear, desire, and something darker. Jalen's heart pounded so loud it drowned the music. He watched as she slipped the bottle onto the tray and brushed Elliot's hand. "Make sure Mr. Hale gets this one. No mistakes tonight, darling." The word darling hung in the air like smoke. Elliot's fingers shook as he uncorked a restaurant bottle and tilted a small measure into a carafe. He tipped the vial, and for a heartbeat nothing happened. Then he shook the tiniest bead into the wine, the motion precise, practiced. He closed the cap, wiped the rim with a napkin, and met her eyes. There was a flash there, greed, relief. They smoothed their clothes, smoothed their faces, and pushed the door open just enough to step out, tidy, composed, like actors finishing a scene. They didn't notice the faint scuff on the floorboards where Jalen's knee had pressed into the dust, or the small boy's breath caught behind a stack of crates. Jalen sat very still, heart hammering so loud he feared it would give him away. He wrapped his fingers around the mop handle until his knuckles went white and told himself, in a voice that felt like it belonged to someone much older, "Not tonight." When Mrs. Davenport and Elliot left the cellar, Jalen waited just long enough for their footsteps to fade, then slipped out too, soft as breath, keeping his distance. The night had deepened, wrapping the Magnolia Garden restaurant in its soft golden hush. Fireflies floated above the lavender bushes, and strings of warm bulbs swayed lazily between the oak trees, their light trembling in the mild Texas breeze. From the porch to the wide garden below, everything glowed: linen-draped tables, polished silver, crystal glasses catching the shimmer of light like stars fallen to earth. Laughter rippled through the air, blending with the faint music of a live band, and the scent of wine, grilled rosemary, and magnolia petals. Jalen crouched behind a row of rose bushes, lining the gravel path, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the rustling leaves, he spotted Mrs. Davenport gliding across the terrace, graceful, proud, her diamond pearls glowing like small moons. Beside her was Elliot, the young waiter she'd been whispering to in the cellar, his hand tight around that same bottle, the one she'd given him. Jalen followed them, careful, his sneakers brushing the dirt softly as he kept to the shadows between the garden lamps. He stopped behind a stone fountain, the steady sound of falling water masking his breath. From his hiding spot, he could see their destination clearly, a private table beneath a vine-covered trellis, where Mr. Donovan Hale, in his perfectly pressed gray suit, sat waiting. Even from afar, Jalen recognized the man. He'd seen his face before, on the front pages stacked by the bodega downtown, on TV screens in the appliance store window. Donovan Hale, the billionaire real estate tycoon, who had once been called the Builder of Austin. A man whose name carried weight like law. He was older now, his temples silvered, but his presence filled the garden. Even seated, he radiated a quiet, commanding power, the kind that made waiters straighten their ties and strangers lower their voices. Mrs. Davenport approached him with the smooth confidence of someone used to moving through expensive worlds. Her smile was polished, beautiful, hollow, practiced. Elliot stood one step behind her, head bowed slightly, the bottle gleaming in his hand. Jalen's throat tightened. Even from here he could almost see the faint glint of that small vial still tucked in Elliot's pocket. The cork popped, soft, almost innocent. The glasses clinked, and in that instant, Jalen's world shrank to the bottle, the pour, the glass, and the terrible memory of what came after. He gripped the edge of the fountain, his palms slick with sweat. If I run out now, he thought, they won't believe me, they'll throw me out. Mr. Brooks might lose his job because of me. He hesitated, torn between fear and duty, between the weight of being poor and the fire of being right. Then the wind shifted, carrying with it something faint, like a whisper through the magnolias. Never walk away from what's right, even if it costs you everything. His mother's voice, the memory unfurled like a film reel left too long in the sun, faded but alive. 5 years ago, in their old home on the east side of Austin, his father, tall, proud, wearing his chef's whites even at home, had just signed the lease for their dream, a small family restaurant. The kitchen had glowed in amber light, filled with the scent of garlic, thyme, and laughter. His mother had poured the wine. Their family friend, Uncle Ray, had raised his glass. To new beginnings, his father had said, smiling wide. The glasses clinked, bright and hopeful. 10 minutes later, hope hit the floor. His father collapsed, his skin turning ashen. The bottle rolled across the tile, sticky from his father's fingerprints. The police called it a tragic accident. His mother called it murder, but no one listened. Ray vanished. Lawsuits came. Their savings disappeared, swallowed by lawyers who stopped answering calls. By the time it was over, all that remained was the memory and the warning that goodness could cost everything. Jalen blinked hard, pulling himself back into the golden present. The garden swam into focus again. Elliot lifted the bottle, pouring deep red wine into 2 crystal glasses. Mrs. Davenport raised hers, her lips curling into that poised smile that liars wore like armor. Mr. Donovan Hale, billionaire philanthropist, the man who had rebuilt half of Austin, lifted his glass in return. That simple motion, the tilt of his wrist, the gleam of red under the lights, tore through Jalen like lightning. Something inside him broke free. He burst from behind the fountain, his small shoes scattering gravel across the stone path. Stop, don't drink that. The words ripped through the garden like thunder. Laughter halted mid-breath. Dozens of heads turned, women in silk gowns, men with napkins frozen halfway to their lips, as the boy sprinted across the terrace, eyes wide, voice cracking with desperation. Donovan Hale barely had time to blink before Jalen reached him and slapped the glass from his hand. It shattered against the flagstone, wine spreading dark and thick across the pale stone like spilled blood. Silence fell heavy. The cicadas were the only ones who dared speak. Jalen stood trembling, chest heaving, his hands shaking with equal parts fear and courage, a hungry boy among the wealthy, defying a world that had always told him to stay invisible. And for a long breathless moment, it seemed as if the whole garden held still, waiting to see whether this world would punish him for saving a life. The garden was silent, the kind of silence that only follows shock, when the air itself seems to hold its breath. The wine glass lay shattered across the flagstone, shards glittering under the trembling strings of light. A dark stain bled outward, glistening like blood among fallen rose petals. The smell of lavender, smoke and something sharp, something electric, filled the air. Then came the eruption. What on earth is happening? Mrs. Davenport shot to her feet, so violently, her chair clattered backward, the clang echoing through the patio like a gunshot. The silk of her crimson gown shimmered in the lamplight as she turned on Jalen, fury flashing in her diamond-ringed hands. Her cheeks burned scarlet, not with shame, but with rage barely caged. "You little animal," she spat, her voice shrill and trembling. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" The guests murmured in alarm. A fork hit a plate with a sharp clink. Someone gasped. Even the fireflies seemed to hover in stunned stillness. Mr. Brooks came running from the kitchen, his apron flapping behind him, eyes wide with panic. "Jalen," he hissed, voice tight between fear and disbelief. "Boy, what are you doing? These are important people." Jalen stood there, small and trembling in the center of all that wealth, the linen, the laughter turned silent, the heavy air of judgment, his fists clenched, his voice wavered but held steady. "She told him to pour it," he said, pointing at Mrs. Davenport. "I saw her put something in the wine, from her purse." The words cut through the garden like a chill wind. All around, faces turned, men, women, servants, all drawn toward the center of the storm. Mrs. Davenport froze for half a heartbeat, then forced a smile, thin, brittle. Her laugh rang out high and false. "Oh, this is rich," she said, her voice trembling with outrage hidden under false amusement. You think I walk around carrying poison in my purse? My God, what is this, some sort of movie? Her fingers fidgeted at her pearls, brushing them as if to wipe away invisible dust. But her eyes, wide flickering, betrayed her. Donovan, she said quickly, her tone melting into practiced sweetness as she turned toward the man beside her. Darling, you don't believe this, do you? Look at me, look at him. Her hand stabbed through the air toward Jalen, a small boy in a patched shirt and worn shoes, the very picture of poverty. He's a stray, she hissed. He works here scrubbing dishes for scraps. And now he's accusing me of, what, murder? The last word cracked like lightning. Behind her, Elliot, the young waiter, stood rigid, pale as paper, fingers twitching at his side. He dared not look up. Say something, Mrs. Davenport muttered under her breath, still smiling for the crowd. Tell them, I don't, he stammered. Useless, she snapped, the mask slipping just long enough for everyone nearby to hear. Gasps rippled through the tables. A woman whispered, did she just? But stopped cold when Mrs. Davenport's glare sliced through her like ice. Mr. Brooks stepped forward again, wringing his hands. Ma'am, please, maybe we can handle this quietly, before. Quietly, she exploded. That filthy boy ruined $1,000 bottle of Bordeaux and humiliated me in front of every guest here. Her voice rang across the garden, sharp and cutting. Even the music from the distant gazebo had stopped. Only the soft whisper of the fountain filled the gaps between her fury. Then came the sound that hushed even her. The scrape of a chair. Donovan Hale, billionaire, philanthropist, the man who built half the city, rose slowly to his feet. The gray suit gleamed faintly under the lights, his silvered hair catching a soft halo. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, but it carried the kind of gravity that made men listen. Why would he say that? He asked quietly. What could a child like him possibly gain by lying? Mrs. Davenport blinked, caught off guard. Because he's jealous, or stupid, or whatever it is strays like him are. She snapped, her tone cracking with panic. Donovan, darling, please, he's trying to ruin us. His eyebrow lifted, the single word cut deeper than any accusation. Her mouth opened then shut again. The crowd leaned forward, the moment thick as smoke. Donovan stepped closer, voice dropping to a slow, deliberate rhythm. Funny, he said, I don't remember inviting you into my use. The silence that followed felt alive. Jalen swallowed hard, the boy's small frame dwarfed by the glow of chandeliers and magnolia trees. He forced the words out through trembling lips. Please, sir, my father died the same way. He drank from a glass he shouldn't have. Everyone said my mom was crazy. The air shifted, quiet, brittle. His voice quivered, but his eyes stayed locked on Donovan's. Please don't make the same mistake. Donovan's jaw flexed. He didn't move for a long time. His gaze flicked from the trembling boy to the woman beside him, to the pearls around her neck, to the faint tremor in her hand. Mrs. Davenport laughed again, but her voice had lost its polish. Donovan, really, you're not actually going to entertain this child's fairy tale, are you? A boy from the streets, over me. She turned to the guests, throwing her arms wide. Are we really doing this? Letting a mop boy accuse a woman of murder because he's watched too many crime shows? The laughter she expected never came. Her voice echoed against stone and silence. For the first time, Donovan didn't look at her. He was thinking, hard. His face, usually composed and firm, showed something almost fragile. Doubt, because as much as he wanted to believe her, there were cracks he couldn't ignore. He remembered the late-night messages she'd started deleting the moment he entered the room. The calls she took on the veranda, her voice hushed, eyes darting toward the windows. The night she'd borrowed his office key for a surprise, then returned it a day later, the latch oddly misaligned. Small things, but now they rose in his mind like ghosts. He studied Jalen again. The boy's clothes were torn, his shoes barely holding together, but his eyes, those eyes, burned with something unshakable. Son, Donovan said finally, his voice measured, you understand what you're saying, don't you? If you're wrong, it could cost people their lives, their reputations, yours too. Jalen's breath caught, but he stood his ground. "I know, sir, but if I don't say it, it'll cost you yours." The words hung there, simple, small, but heavy as truth. A murmur swept through the guests. Someone whispered, "He sounds sure." Another, "The waiter looks terrified." Mrs. Davenport's composure began to fracture. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "He's manipulating you. Look at him, dirty, desperate." "He's clean," Donovan interrupted, his tone sharp but calm. His gaze flicked down to Jalen's shirt, neatly washed though frayed at the edges. "Cleaner than most men I know." The crowd stirred again. The sound was subtle but telling. The power in the air had shifted, ever so slightly, away from her. "Donovan, please," she said, voice trembling now. "You're humiliating me." He sighed softly, the sound almost weary. "No," he said, "I'm giving you the chance to tell me the truth." For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Her lips parted, eyes darting toward Elliot, who stood pale and shaking beside her. He looked at her once, and in that one look, the truth flickered between them like lightning. Her face hardened. "You'll regret this," she whispered, but Donovan didn't move. His gray eyes stayed locked on hers, waiting, weighing. The warm wind stirred the magnolias. The fountain whispered faintly, and in the heart of that golden garden, surrounded by wealth and fear and something quietly divine, a poor boy's courage began to tip the balance of the night. Jalen's small hands hung at his sides, trembling, but not from fear anymore. From conviction, and for the first time the billionaire wasn't sure who among them truly had the most to lose. Under the soft lights and the whispering trees, the truth felt close, too close to ignore, and everyone could sense it. The laughter was gone. The night itself seemed to listen, and in that stillness the world waited for what Donovan Hale would decide. Only the hum of the fountain and the faint buzzing of insects filled the silence. Mrs. Davenport stood there motionless for a moment, and then, as if deciding to reclaim control, she straightened her back, smoothed the front of her dress, and forced out a brittle laugh. "You know what?" she said, her voice sharp with pride. "Let's end this circus right now. If everyone's so eager to believe a child's fantasy, then let's test the damn wine." Her sudden composure startled even Mr. Brooks. She reached for the half-empty bottle on the table, lifting it by the neck with theatrical confidence. "See, I have nothing to hide," she declared, though the tremor in her fingers betrayed her. The guests exchanged uncertain glances. Donovan's jaw was tight, but he didn't stop her. The bottle's red liquid gleamed under the garden lights, innocent to the eye, deadly beneath. "To the lab," she continued, her voice rising. "We'll get the results within the hour." Jalen stared at her, wide-eyed. He didn't understand how someone could sound so calm while lying so perfectly, but Mrs. Davenport's mind was already 3 steps ahead. She had planned for this, because in the trunk of her car, parked neatly at the front gate of the Magnolia Garden restaurant, was another identical bottle. She had prepared it days ago. Same brand, same label, even a small scratch on the glass to match. She'd thought of everything. And on her phone, waiting for her signal, were 2 people, acquaintances of Donovan's, men she had charmed and manipulated into believing she was the true victim. They were waiting nearby, ready to assist with the test if she called. The plan was simple. On the short drive to the lab, she'd switch the bottles. By the time results came back, she'd be clean, untouchable again. She turned toward Donovan, flashing him a brittle smile that almost passed for grace. "You'll see how ridiculous this all is, darling." And then, but she didn't finish that sentence. Because just as she lifted the bottle to walk away, a calm, steady voice sliced through the humid Texas air. "No need for that, ma'am." Every head turned. A woman stepped forward from a nearby table, mid-30s, composed, wearing a white blouse and dark slacks. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried like a command. Around her neck hung an ID badge that caught the light. Mrs. Davenport's smile faltered. "Excuse me, who are you?" The woman flipped the badge toward her, its seal shining clearly under the lamps. "Travis County Forensic Science Center." "I work in forensics," she said evenly. "Travis County Lab. I happen to be here for dinner with my husband." She gestured calmly toward a man still sitting, wide-eyed, 2 tables away. "And as luck would have it, I carry a portable test kit for emergencies." A stunned silence. Someone gasped. Jalen's breath caught in his throat. Mrs. Davenport blinked, then laughed, too loud, too shrill. Oh, how convenient. The lab just happens to be dining with us, isn't that adorable? But the woman didn't flinch. She motioned for a busboy to bring her a small dish and crouched beside the broken glass. If you don't mind, we'll test it right here, she said simply. That way no one needs to make any unnecessary trips. Mrs. Davenport froze. The color drained from her face, though she forced her lips into something resembling a smile. Well, I suppose that's fair, she murmured, clutching the bottle tighter. The forensic woman opened a black pouch from her purse, compact, professional, unmistakably real. Inside were small vials, droppers and chemical strips. She knelt gracefully, dipped a swab into the red puddle pooled between the stones, and added a few drops of clear reagent. Everyone leaned in. For 2 long seconds nothing happened. Then slowly, unmistakably, the liquid darkened, swirling from ruby to violet to black. A collective gasp rose from the tables. A woman dropped her napkin. A man muttered something under his breath. The forensic analyst's voice cut through it, quiet but absolute. It's poison. Cyanide compound. The garden erupted in whispers, chairs creaked, even the night seemed to retreat. Mrs. Davenport stumbled backward, hand clutching the bottle like a drowning woman gripping driftwood. In bass, what idrik unsigned or nevier sheer. That's absurd, she stammered, voice quivering now. Someone must have tampered with it. She pointed to Jalen. He probably switched it. Ma'am, the forensic woman said coolly. I just tested residue from the shattered glass. It matches the bottle you're holding. Unless this child has been hiding cyanide in his apron, I suggest you stop talking. The words landed like a slap. Elliot, the waiter, had gone pale as milk. He opened his mouth once, twice, before words finally stumbled out. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he whispered, shaking. She told me to pour it. She said it was just something to make him sick, not kill him. I still have her voice message. The sound that left Mrs. Davenport's throat was part gasp, part growl. Her mask cracked wide open. You fool, she hissed. You were supposed to keep your mouth shut. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Donovan's expression hardened, all warmth gone. The way he looked at her now, it wasn't anger, it was disbelief. A kind of mourning. So it's true, he said softly. Mrs. Davenport's breath hitched. For a moment the fury drained from her, replaced by something raw and trembling. She laughed, a broken sound that barely rose above the hum of the fountain. You think I'm some kind of monster, she whispered. You think this is who I wanted to become. He owned me. Every smile, every dress, every dinner like this one, all bought and sold by his approval. I wanted out. Just once, I wanted to breathe without asking permission. Donovan took a slow step toward her, eyes wet but voice steady. You could have just left. She laughed again, softer this time. Defeated. Of course I will go, but not empty-handed. She glanced at the bottle in her hand, tears spilling freely now. 2 weeks ago, he added you to his will. That's great. Before he changes his mind, I have to do something. Her voice cracked. I couldn't let him erase me. Sirens wailed in the distance. Blue and red lights began to dance across the trees, flashing over the spilled wine and trembling faces. 2 officers approached the table, one of them reading her rights as the other reached for her wrists. Mrs. Davenport didn't resist. She only turned her head as they cuffed her, eyes locking with Donovan's one last time. He ruined me first, she said, her voice flat, lifeless, the last breath of a lie she'd told herself for years. They led her away under the string lights. The garden was still again. The fountain gurgled softly. Donovan exhaled, long and hollow, then looked down at Jalen. The boy stood small against the chaos, his eyes wide, heart still hammering. You saved my life, kid, Donovan said quietly, maybe the best part of it. And beneath the lavender trees of the magnolia garden, the night finally exhaled, the kind of breath that comes only after truth breaks open. By the time the last police car turned off the gravel drive, the sun had long slipped behind the oak trees. It was barely 7, but the garden felt older, drained, hollow, suspended in the kind of silence that follows catastrophe. Mr. Brooks placed a hand on Jalen's shoulder. You did the right thing, son, he murmured, voice heavy. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Jalen just nodded. His throat was tight, his heart still racing. The night air carried the faint scent of lavender and smoke. A few steps away, Donovan Hale stood beneath the garden lights, his gray suit rumpled, the mask of composure stripped from him. For once he didn't look like the man who owned half the skyline. He looked human, tired, alone. His gaze lingered on the spot where the shattered glass had fallen, where death had almost found him. He inhaled deeply, exhaled slow, then turned toward the boy. "You saved my life tonight," he said quietly. Jalen didn't answer. He just looked down at his shoes, clutching the hem of his shirt, like he wasn't sure what to do with his hands. Donovan took a step closer, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes. "Tell me something, kid," he said, voice low. "What do I owe you?" Jalen blinked, startled. "Owe me?" "Yes," Donovan said. "You don't save a man's life for nothing." The boy shook his head quickly. "You don't owe me anything, sir." Donovan frowned slightly. "That's not how the world works. You do something like this, you deserve something back." "It's fine," Jalen said softly, his voice a little shaky but firm. I just didn't want you to get hurt." That answer, simple, honest, seemed to unsettle Donovan more than anything else. He stared at the boy for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then sighed. "You remind me of someone I used to be," he muttered. "A long time ago." Jalen didn't know what to say. The man's voice carried a weight that didn't match his wealth, a loneliness that money couldn't touch. Donovan ran a hand through his hair, glancing at the boy again. "Look," he said, more gently this time. "I don't like debts, especially not ones like this. So tell me, what do you want?" "Anything." The boy hesitated, his small fingers fidgeting at his side. "Really, sir, I don't need anything." Donovan let out a small disbelieving laugh, not mocking, just sad. "You're 12, right? There's always something a 12-year-old wants." Jalen gave a faint smile, almost embarrassed. Maybe some new shoes," he admitted, then shook his head immediately. "No, never mind, I'm fine." Donovan tilted his head. "You sure?" "Yes, sir." He studied the boy again, the torn shoes, the frayed cuffs, the dirt under his nails that no amount of scrubbing could erase, and saw something he hadn't noticed before. Pride. The kind that doesn't come from having anything, but from holding on to dignity when the world tries to take it away. He nodded slowly, as if understanding something that had been hiding in plain sight. "All right then," he said. "But if you change your mind, I won't," Jalen said quickly. Donovan almost smiled. Stubborn kid. A long silence passed between them. The air grew cooler, the faint sound of cicadas rising from the garden's edge. Then, out of nowhere, Donovan spoke again, quieter this time, almost to himself. "You know, I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who smile for the wrong reasons. Tonight, for the first time in years, someone did something real, and now I don't know how to thank them." Jalen looked up. There was something in the man's eyes he hadn't seen before. Not power, not pity, but sincerity. "If you really want to thank me," the boy said softly, "come with me. I want to show you something." Donovan raised a brow. "At this hour?" "It's not far," Jalen replied. "Please." The man hesitated, looking toward the restaurant, the empty tables, the faint light spilling from the kitchen windows. He had board meetings waiting tomorrow, phone calls to return, people who would whisper about tonight. And yet, something inside him said, "Stay." He gave a small nod. "All right, kid, lead the way." They left the garden together, the man in his fine suit, the boy in his hand-me-downs. The gravel crunched under their feet as they walked past the gate where the faint smell of lavender faded into the humid Austin night. The city hummed quietly around them, street lights flickering, dogs barking somewhere in the distance. Donovan loosened his tie, glancing sideways at the boy walking a few steps ahead. "You sure you know where you're going?" he asked. Jalen grinned faintly without turning around. "Yes, sir, I walk this way every night." Donovan nodded slowly. The May air felt warmer here, alive in a way his world never was. For the first time that evening, he felt the weight in his chest start to lift, replaced by something else. Something like curiosity, something like hope. And as they disappeared down the dim, uneven road toward the poorer side of Austin, neither of them spoke again. But both knew the night wasn't over yet. It was only just beginning. They walked in silence for nearly 10 minutes, a strange pairing under the Texas dusk. The man in the gray suit, whose shoes cost more than the roofs they passed, and the boy in a torn shirt, guiding him through streets that maps forgot. The deeper they went, the more the world changed. The neat sidewalks gave way to cracked pavement. The air grew heavier, thick with humidity, and the faint scent of fried onions from some late-night food stand. A dog barked behind a rusted gate. Wind rattled tin roofing above the small wooden homes. Donovan slowed his pace, eyes shifting from house to house. Everything looked fragile here, like one hard rain could wash it all away. And yet there was life, the faint hum of a radio, laughter from children chasing each other barefoot through puddles. He glanced at Jalen, who walked ahead with quiet ease, the rhythm of someone who belonged. "You walk this way every night?" Donovan asked. The boy nodded without turning around. "Every night I work, it's faster this way. The streets with lights, they take too long." The man frowned. "You shouldn't be walking alone this late." Jalen smiled faintly. "I don't walk alone, sir. Everybody here looks out for everybody, even if they don't have much." They turned down a narrow lane where the asphalt ended in dirt. Old houses leaned on each other for balance, their windows glowing dim and yellow. A flickering street light hummed overhead like an old neon sign, refusing to die. Finally, Jalen stopped in front of a small wooden shack, pressed between two brick walls. Its door was a sheet of plywood painted blue, its roof patched with sheets of plastic and tar. "This is home," Jalen said softly. Donovan stared for a long time. The porch steps sagged, the window was cracked, held together with duct tape. Yet a small pot of daisies sat by the door, blooming stubbornly in the dim light. "You live here?" he asked quietly, almost disbelieving. The boy nodded. "Me and my mom, when she's not working at the shelter." There was no shame in his voice, just simple fact. That somehow made it hurt even more. Before Donovan could reply, a few children peeked out from the alley across the street. Their faces were dirty but bright, their eyes full of mischief. "Jalen's back," one shouted. "Did you bring bread?" Jalen's grin bloomed instantly. "Always," he said, rummaging through his bag. He pulled out a loaf, half wrapped in napkins, and tore it carefully, handing pieces to each child. The smallest girl, no older than 6, looked up at Donovan with round eyes. "You Jalen's new friend?" she asked. Donovan blinked. He hadn't been called that word, friend, in a long time. "Maybe," he said, managing a small smile. The girl nodded like that settled it, and ran off laughing. As they walked further down the alley, Donovan spoke quietly, his voice touched with disbelief. "You feed them, with what you earn?" "When I can," Jalen said. "We share what we have. Sometimes we cook together behind Miss Rose's house. She has an old stove that still works." Donovan's chest tightened. He looked at the boy, thin, undersized, wearing clothes that had seen too many washings, and saw someone who had more generosity than half the men he'd ever done business with. They reached the end of the alley. There, tucked beneath a flickering bulb, stood a small structure built from crates, wood planks, and broken shelves. A piece of cardboard above the door read, in uneven handwriting, "Community Library." "This," Jalen said softly, "is what I wanted to show you." He pushed open the door. Inside, the air was warm and still. The room was barely the size of Donovan's office bathroom, but it pulsed with life. Books of every shape and age filled the crooked shelves, some missing covers, others patched with tape. Piles of notebooks sat on the floor. The walls were covered with drawings made by children, stick figures, houses, suns, words like hope and future written in bright crayon. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly in the breeze from a cracked window. Donovan stepped inside slowly, afraid that one wrong move might break the spell. His expensive shoes left faint prints on the dusty floor. "You built this?" he asked. Jalen smiled proudly. "Me and the kids. The older ones helped with the shelves. We found the books from the thrift shop and the recycling bin behind the school." He picked up a notebook, the corners soft and curled. "We write stories too, mostly about the things we want to do when we grow up." Donovan reached for a book, its pages yellowed and uneven. His fingertips brushed across a child's handwriting. "One day, I'll be a doctor." He swallowed hard. "This is extraordinary." Jalen shrugged lightly. "It's small, but it's ours. When it rains, the roof leaks, we put a bucket there." He pointed to a corner, where a plastic pail sat beneath a water stain. "Sometimes we read by flashlight when the power goes out." Donovan's eyes softened. "You shouldn't have to live like this." The boy tilted his head. curious. Why not? It's not so bad, we still get to dream. Something in that sentence cracked open a part of Donovan that had been sealed for years. He looked around again, the crooked shelves, the drawings, the soft hum of that single bulb, and felt a heat rise behind his eyes. Why books? He asked, finally, his voice low, almost reverent. Not food, not toys. Jalen hesitated, as though thinking how to explain something that felt too simple to put into words. Because food disappears when you eat it, he said softly. Toys break, but knowledge stays. You can pass it on, and it doesn't run out. He smiled a little, looking at the shelves. When people read, they see something bigger. Maybe that's how they stop feeling trapped. Donovan nodded slowly, the words sinking in like rain into dry ground. He turned toward the door, toward the dark street outside, then looked back at the boy. You asked me for $2,500, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Was it for this? Jalen nodded once. His tone was humble, but steady. We need to fix the roof before the summer storms come, and buy real lights, and maybe more books. I was going to ask Mr. Brooks to help me write a letter to the city library. Maybe they'd send us a few. Donovan's lips parted, but no words came. He simply stood there, the man who once measured everything by profit, now unable to measure what this child had built out of nothing but hope. A long silence fell between them, not awkward, but sacred. Finally, Donovan exhaled slowly. You saved my life, Jalen, he said, voice trembling slightly. But tonight, you did more than that. Jalen looked up, confused. What do you mean, sir? Donovan met his gaze, his eyes tired but shining. You reminded me what it's worth. The boy smiled faintly, small, genuine, the kind that carried gratitude without pride. Outside, the wind rustled through the alleys, tugging gently at the edges of the patched roof. Somewhere, a baby cried, and a woman's voice soothed it back into silence. The city hummed, tired, broken but alive. And under that dim flickering light, Donovan Hale, a man who'd spent a lifetime buying power, building walls and burying guilt, stood in the smallest library in Austin, surrounded by children's laughter and torn pages, and felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. The air inside that tiny wooden library felt alive, like it was breathing with them. The single light bulb buzzed softly, flickering just enough to remind them how fragile everything was here. Donovan Hale stood silently, his tall figure bent slightly under the low ceiling, the smell of old paper and dust settling into his suit like memory. Jalen sat cross-legged on the floor, organizing a stack of weathered notebooks. His fingers were quick and careful, as if the pages were treasure. He hummed something faint, a tune that sounded like it came from the church down the street. Donovan watched him for a long time before speaking. Jalen, he said softly, how long have you been doing this? The boy looked up, confused by the question. The library, yes, almost a year, sir. Since the roof started leaking at home, I figured if we had to be out here anyway, we might as well build something good. His answer came so simply, so matter-of-fact that Donovan almost smiled. Almost. You just decided to build a library, he murmured. With no help, no money. Jalen shrugged, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Didn't need money, just needed people who cared. And nails. Donovan laughed quietly, shaking his head. But the sound wasn't mocking. It was soft, amazed. You remind me of someone I used to know, he said. Who? Jalen asked. The man paused. Me, a long time ago. Jalen tilted his head, studying him. What happened to him? Donovan didn't answer right away. His eyes went distant, tracing the grain of the wooden wall as if he could read the years written there. He got scared, he said finally. Started thinking about what could go wrong instead of what could go right. So he built walls instead of bridges. Made a lot of money, lost something else along the way. The boy frowned, thoughtful. Can't you get it back? Donovan blinked. Get what back? Whatever you lost. The question hit harder than it should have. Donovan stared at the boy, at the torn collar, the dirt under his fingernails, the quiet steadiness in his eyes, and felt something twist in his chest. He had no answer that made sense. Maybe, he said finally, voice low, if I'm lucky. For a while, silence filled the room again, not awkward, but thick with unspoken things. The wind brushed the door, rattling the frame, A few loose pages fluttered across the floor like pale birds. Then Donovan asked, "You ever think about leaving this place, Jalen? Doing something for yourself?" The boy hesitated. "Sometimes, but who's gonna take care of them if I go?" "Them." Jalen pointed toward the street where faint laughter echoed. "The kids playing tag near the alley. They come here after school. Some of them don't have homes. Some can't read yet. If I leave, the books go back to being boxes again." His words were simple, but the way he said them made Donovan's throat tighten. He'd spent years funding educational initiatives, complete with press releases and photo ops, but no amount of money had ever sounded this pure. "You shouldn't have to carry that weight, son," he said softly. "It's not a weight," Jalen replied. "It's a promise." Donovan leaned back against the shelf, his expression unreadable. "You talk like someone twice your age." The boy grinned, a little shyly. "Mama says I was born tired." That earned a real laugh this time, low, warm, genuine. The kind of laugh Donovan hadn't heard from himself in years. Then the boy reached for something behind a pile of books, a photo, faded and curled at the edges. He held it up to the light. It showed him and his mother standing in front of a hospital, both smiling, their clothes worn but clean. "She wants to finish nursing school one day," Jalen said, running a finger along the edge of the picture. "She used to study before my dad died. Said she wanted to help people like he did. But when he got sick, she had to drop everything." Donovan looked at the photograph, then at Jalen. His voice softened. "You miss him?" The boy's smile faltered for the first time. "Every day," he whispered. "He used to tell me stories before bed, about how being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right even when you are." The man swallowed hard. That sentence, the simple truth of it, struck deeper than any sermon or speech he'd ever heard. He stepped closer, his tone gentler now. "And what about you, Jalen? What do you want to be when you grow up?" The boy's eyes lifted. They were bright, alive. "A teacher," he said without hesitation. "Maybe even build a school. Not a fancy one. Just a place where kids can learn things that matter, how to think, how to believe in themselves." Donovan nodded slowly, his lips parting as if to speak, but he didn't. He couldn't. The lump in his throat was too thick. Instead he walked to the center of the small room, turning a slow circle, taking everything in again. The shelves, the patched roof, the trembling bulb. "You asked me for $2,500, he said finally. "That's not nearly enough for what this place needs." Jalen looked startled. I wasn't trying to ask for more." "I know," Donovan interrupted gently. "That's what makes it different." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a sleek black wallet. From inside, he took a card, white, embossed with gold lettering. He handed it to the boy. "This is my personal number," he said. "You call me if anyone gives you trouble, or if you ever need help." Jalen turned the card over in his hands, his thumb brushing over the name printed there. "You're really giving this to me?" Donovan nodded. "You earned it. But, why me?" The man's smile was faint but sincere. "Because tonight you reminded me what courage looks like, and because I think you're going to change more than you realize." The boy said nothing for a moment, then almost whispering, he asked, "You really think so?" Donovan crouched so their eyes met. His voice was soft, steady. "I don't think it, I know it." Jalen's lips curved into a shy smile, the kind of smile that made hope look possible again. He looked down at the business card, like it was something sacred, then carefully tucked it into his notebook. "Thank you, sir." Donovan stood, brushing the dust from his knee. He glanced at the cracked ceiling, where the bulb flickered faintly, threatening to go dark. "If you could have anything in the world," he asked suddenly, "what would it be?" The boy thought for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then he looked up, smiling softly. "Light." Donovan blinked. "Light, yes sir. So kids can read at night without candles. So it's never too dark to learn." The man's jaw tightened as emotion swept through him. He looked around again, at the boy, the shelves, the fragile dreams balancing on nails and hope, and realized he had never truly seen light until now. He reached out and gently rested a hand on Jalen's shoulder. "Then light you'll have," he said quietly. "I promise." Outside, the wind carried the distant hum of the city, cars, laughter, the faint rhythm of music drifting from somewhere far away. Inside the little library, the bulb flickered once, twice, then steadied, glowing warmer than before, and in that faint golden light, Donovan Hale, the man who once measured his worth in numbers, saw something worth more than every fortune he'd ever built. A boy with a torn shirt, a notebook full of dreams, and a heart big enough to change the world. The first light of dawn came softly, the kind of light that doesn't shout, but whispers its way into the world. It slipped through the cracked wooden panels of a tiny house in East Austin, turning dust into gold, and the night's silence into something gentle, almost holy. The city was still half asleep. Somewhere far away, the first bus grumbled to life, its engine echoing through the narrow streets. A rooster crowed, hoarse, late, and determined. Inside the small shack that the neighborhood children called the library, Jalen Carter stirred. He was curled up on the floor, wrapped in his mother's old coat, his head resting on a stack of books, stories he'd promised to finish reading aloud next week. His fingers still clutched the corner of a worn notebook, its cover marked with pencil sketches, and the faint outline of a dream. Future plans. The morning sun brushed against his cheek, warming his skin. His eyes fluttered open. For a moment he didn't remember where he was, just the smell of old pages, and the faint sound of children's laughter that seemed to linger in the air. Then it all came back, the restaurant, the shouting, the wine glass exploding against marble, and the man whose life had hung between truth and silence. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, watching the sunlight spill across the uneven floorboards. A few kids were already waiting outside, their voices muffled by the thin walls. "Jalen, you up yet? Miss Rosa says the news truck came again." Jalen blinked, confused. "News truck," he murmured, getting to his feet. When he stepped outside, the world felt different. People he'd never seen before were walking through the neighborhood. Camera crews, volunteers in matching shirts, city workers surveying the street. The potholes that had been there forever were suddenly being filled. Someone was repainting the faded fence at the end of the alley, and standing near the corner, talking to a group of officials, was a tall man in a dark blue suit. Donovan Hale, the same man whose name had appeared in headlines for decades, the tycoon, the investor, the man the city whispered about, but never met. Except now, his suit jacket was off, his sleeves rolled up, and there was no camera on him. He looked up as Jalen approached, and for a fleeting second, he almost smiled. "Morning, kid." Jalen stopped a few feet away, barefoot on the gravel. "You really came back. Told you I would." Donovan nodded toward the chaos of workers around them. "Sorry for the mess. I think we're about to make your neighborhood a little noisier." Jalen's brow furrowed. "What's all this?" The man crouched slightly so their eyes were level. There was something new in his face, not the authority of power, but the calm of someone who'd finally found purpose. "A promise," he said, "and a start." By mid-morning, the story had already reached every news outlet in Texas. Billionaire survives poisoning, credits local boy for saving his life. The Jalen Carter Foundation announced $25 million for education equity. But here, on the cracked sidewalks of East Austin, none of that mattered. Donovan stood beside a small podium, looking slightly uncomfortable as city officials and reporters gathered under the makeshift tent. Behind him, a steel sign was covered by a white sheet, waiting to be revealed. Jalen's mother, Marion Carter, stood near the back, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from an overnight shift. She watched, hands clasped tight against her chest, her eyes glistening with pride and disbelief. A reporter's voice broke through the chatter. "Hale, what inspired you to name the foundation after this young man?" Donovan adjusted the microphone, his voice quiet but steady. "Because some people build their lives chasing wealth, and some build them chasing meaning. Last week, a 12-year-old boy taught me the difference." The crowd leaned in. Even the wind seemed to still. "I've spent my life buying things, buildings, companies, respect. But what Jalen built with nothing but hope, that's worth more than any tower I'll ever own." He paused, glancing toward the boy who stood off to the side, still wearing the same patched shirt, and two big sneakers someone from the staff had given him. "This foundation," Donovan continued, "isn't charity, it's a blueprint. For every forgotten street, every child who still believes learning can change the world, starting right here." He turned and nodded to a city worker. The sheet dropped from the sign, revealing gleaming letters beneath the sunlight. The Jalen Carter Community Learning Center. Applause broke out, some polite, some genuine. But Jalen didn't clap, he just stared at the sign, his throat tightening. He couldn't quite believe the letters spelled his name. Donovan stepped aside, motioning for him to come forward. The boy hesitated, glancing at his mother, who nodded through tears. Slowly he made his way to the front. The microphone was taller than him. Someone lowered it. His voice trembled at first, then found its strength. Thank you, he began, earning a few soft chuckles. I don't really know what to say. I didn't mean to save anybody that night. I just didn't want someone to get hurt. He looked at Donovan, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. But if this place can help other kids learn, then maybe that's what my dad would have wanted. He used to say that knowledge is like light, you can't see where you're going without it. He looked out at the crowd, his voice steady now. So thank you for giving us light. The applause this time was louder, warmer, alive. Cameras flashed, but Jalen barely noticed. He turned to Donovan, who was smiling now, that same quiet, proud smile that said more than any speech could. In the weeks that followed, East Austin transformed. Construction crews worked from sunrise to sundown. The air filled with the sound of drills, hammers, and laughter. Kids who used to roam the streets came to help carry bricks, paint walls, and sort books, donated from across the state. The foundation's volunteers arrived, teachers, librarians, architects. Donovan visited the site every few days, sometimes alone, sometimes with investors who looked wildly out of place in the heat and dust. He didn't care what they thought. Jalen, meanwhile, became something of a legend. The city called him the boy who saved a billionaire. But when reporters asked what he thought of the title, he always said the same thing: he wasn't the one who needed saving. At night, when the construction lights flickered across the half-built structure, Donovan and Jalen would sit on the curb with paper cups of lemonade, watching the workers pack up. You ever think about what you're going to do when this is finished? Donovan asked one evening. Keep reading, Jalen said with a grin, and maybe build another one. Donovan chuckled. You really don't stop, do you? If I stop, people forget, the boy replied simply. The answer silenced him. He looked up at the half-finished roof, at the stars starting to appear through the steel frame, and wondered how a child who had so little could understand more about purpose than most grown men he knew. 3 months later, the center opened its doors. It wasn't grand or pretentious, just beautiful in its simplicity. Glass walls bathed in sunlight, rows of new computers, bookshelves stretching toward high windows, the scent of fresh paint mixed with paper and hope. Children crowded the halls, their laughter echoing against polished floors. In the main reading room, a mural covered the back wall, painted by local artists. It showed a young boy holding a lantern, lighting a path for others to follow. Beneath it were words in silver letters: knowledge is the light that never burns out. J.C. Jalen's mother stood beside Donovan at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "You didn't just save my son's dream, Mr. Hale, you gave him a future." Donovan smiled faintly, eyes still on the boy surrounded by other children inside. "No, ma'am," he said softly, "he gave one to me." Time has a way of softening the edges of even the hardest nights. 10 years passed, the city grew taller, brighter, louder. The foundation expanded across Texas, libraries, scholarships, community schools. Each building carried the same golden plaque, the Jalen Carter Foundation, and yet every project started the same way, with a visit from Donovan Hale, now older, slower, his hair silvered at the temples. He never stayed long. Just enough to walk the halls, speak to a few children, and leave a book on the shelf with a note tucked inside. For those who still believe in light. He passed away quietly one spring evening, sitting in his office, a cup of cold tea beside him. No headlines captured his last words, no grand announcement, but on his desk sat a framed photo, a 12-year-old boy standing beside him in a dirt alley, both smiling beneath a handmade sign that read Community Library. 15 years later, on a bright Saturday morning, a crowd gathered in that same neighborhood, where it all began. The old wooden houses had been replaced by gardens and colorful murals. The once cracked road was smooth now, lined with trees. Inside a new building, sleek glass, sunlit halls, Professor Jalen Carter, now 27, stood before a classroom of young students. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, chalk dust on his fingers. Behind him hung a framed portrait of Donovan Hale. The children were restless, whispering to one another. Jalen smiled, the same quiet smile he'd worn all those years ago. "All right everyone," he said, clapping his hands. "Let's start with a question." He picked up a piece of chalk and wrote on the board in big letters, "What does it mean to change the world?" The room fell silent. A small boy in the front row raised his hand. "It means doing something big," he said, "like building stuff or being famous." Jalen chuckled softly. "That's one way. But sometimes changing the world doesn't start big. It starts small, with one choice, one act of kindness, one time you decide not to look away." He turned toward the window, where sunlight poured in through the glass. For a moment he saw his 12-year-old self reflected there, barefoot, nervous, holding on to hope, like it was the only thing that belonged to him. He looked back at his students and smiled. "You don't need power to make a difference, you just need light, the kind that starts inside you." The children listened quietly. One girl whispered, "That's what our library's named after, isn't it?" The man and the boy. Jalen nodded slowly. "Yes, he believed in me before anyone else did, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure that light keeps spreading." Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of magnolia blossoms, the same flowers that once framed a night of danger and choice, the same scent that had followed Jalen his entire life. He turned back to the board, writing the next line in careful script. "Knowledge doesn't just change minds, it saves lives." The children copied the words into their notebooks, and as he watched them, heads bent, pencils scratching, eyes full of quiet determination, something stirred in his chest, the same feeling he'd once had sitting in that tiny shack with books held together by tape and prayer. He whispered under his breath, so soft that only he could hear it, "Thank you, Mr. Hale." The bell rang. Laughter filled the hallways. Jalen lingered for a moment, looking out the window toward the community garden across the street. The sunlight shimmered on the leaves, and in that glow, he could almost imagine the man himself, standing beneath the magnolia trees, smiling faintly, proud, content, because some stories don't end where they begin. Some ripple outward, finding new hearts to live in. And that morning in Austin, beneath a sky washed clean with gold, the boy who once stopped a poisoned glass, carried on the legacy of the man he had saved, proof that sometimes, the smallest act of courage can start a miracle that never stops growing.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.